Hey guys, and welcome back to part 2 of our Sci-Fi and Substance Designer video series. My name is Javier Perez, and I'll be instructor to this course. In this lesson, we'll be taking our previous floor material and covering techniques and thought processes that can be applied to quickly and efficiently create material variations of the same flooring. MSI was kind enough to supply me with a laptop to test out with Substance Designer. Thanks to the performance of the Intel Core i9 and RTX 2080, I'm able to work so much more quickly and efficiently and not have to worry about how complex my graphs are getting. And thanks to its thin and light design, I can make materials anywhere I go. I hope you'll enjoy this one and look forward to sharing my experiences with you. So let's get started. So to begin, we're just going to open up our last material that we finished in our last lesson. So it's going to just be the regular floor without the grading. We're just going to let this load in. So the first thing that we're going to want to do with this guy is we're actually going to duplicate the graph and rename it to floor 02. That way we don't have any discrepancies and we can still have our old material. That way if we needed to sample something or if we needed to go back to it for whatever reason, we have it there. You want to make sure you double click on the floor 2 graph on the left hand side, because when you actually make a copy and a duplicate, it doesn't make it the active graph, so you actually physically have to click on it, or else you're going to be editing floor 01 still. So one of the first things that I want to do is I want to get rid of all the previous parts that we had done in the last material. So all the piping and the X frame that we did, I just want to go ahead and get rid of that. I try to find where all this is being blended into, and I make sure I disconnect that and just add a white onto the clamps there. What this will do is it's going to flatten out the entire height map, but all the color information is going to be on there. So don't mind it too much, as we're just going to go ahead and fix it a little bit down the line. Before we go ahead and delete all the old stuff, during the floor frame, we did have a few shapes that were helpful to create the edge lip. So I made sure to copy those and just reconnect them, because once we start deleting all the nodes prior, those are going to get deleted as well. So I just made sure to make a duplicate. That way they're still there when we go ahead and start deleting all this stuff. So here I go in and start grabbing all the different frames and I start deleting them. First with the floor frame, and then the X shape, and then the pipes as well. So you'll notice here now our material is pretty flat. That's because the white that we have on the height map is just making it pretty flat. What we want to do now is I actually want to make an indent right in the middle that kind of simulates kind of the rubber panel that we had earlier. So that smaller little indent that we had, I'm gonna extend that and make it longer. So I'm just looking at where the rubber indent was happening, and I'm just gonna move the graph over to the left a little bit. That way we can clearly have a space to add this new shape. So here I'm just gonna bring in a shape, and I'm bringing it down on the X value. That way we get almost a tall looking rectangle. I bring in a transform node because I want the bottom to be raised a little bit so it's not hitting right the edge of the texture sheet. But I noticed that once I start moving the transform, it's not really affecting it. That's because the shape is still set to tiling. So I go back into the shape and make sure to turn off tiling. I then bring in a bevel, and the bevel is going to act like it's going to help the shape act like it's being indented into the metal frame. So once I have it at a value I like, I start bringing in the blend node, and then I'm going to actually put it on subtract. I bring down the opacity just a bit, because if we leave it on too dark, it's going to be tessellated way too much, and the height is going to be pushing way into the metal frame, which is something we want to avoid. I take that newly created shape and I move it into the connector that has the rubber pattern, and I go ahead and delete the old panel that was there before. I left the rubber pattern because I still want to use that pattern on this newly created panel. I'm going back into the bevel here, and I'm just messing with the distance because I thought the distance of the bevel previously was a little bit too big, so try to soften that up by just adjusting the distance and the smoothing a little bit till I get something that I like. I want to get the colors back to what they were originally. So I go into the area where we have all our albedo nodes, and I'm just actually bringing in I'm connecting the main color of the metal that it was prior, and I'm just making that the main node, and I'm getting rid of all the extra color nodes that were set based off the pipe colors and also the big X frame. Because we have everything pretty much neatly organized, it's super easy to go in and make sure everything is connected. I just go ahead and get rid of the pipe colors and the X frame colors as well, so we can just go and find those and just start deleting them. So now we're getting our color back to what the panel was previously. It's almost that like dark gunmetal. And I'm just adjusting it so we still keep our graph nice and organized. I start looking back at where the area of that tiling pattern that was on the rubber panel, and I notice that the mask is no longer there, so I go in to our newly created shape that we made for our indent, and I'm gonna actually use that as a mask for the tiling pattern. So as you can see here, we've attached that mask now, and then that nice cool tiling rubber pattern is appearing where our newly created indent is now. I'm not a big fan of how the pattern is kind of creeping into the sides of that panel, that indent. So I bring in the levels and I start messing with it to try to push back the pattern from creeping up on the sides a little bit. So here I'm just messing with the blacks and the whites to try to sharpen up the mask a little bit and move it kind of closer towards the middle. So I'm liking what's going on here, so I kind of just exaggerate just a little bit, and I keep looking at the 3D view to make sure it's giving me the result I'm looking for. So as I'm working through all this, I'm not liking the chipped paint effect that had previously, so I go in and actually delete the nodes that are no longer being used, and I make sure to bring down the position. That way it gives me a little bit more freedom to focus on the actual just shapes currently. I don't want to be focusing on how the scratches are affecting the panel right now. So here I can see that the rubber indent color from the previous material is still there, but there is actually not a mask plugged in because we deleted that shape earlier. So whatever's connected to the rubber indent color mask area is actually just a free floating connector piece. So I follow it and I notice that nothing's connected to it. Make sure to delete it. And because there's no mask now, it's going to get filled with that darker color. So, but now that we know where that mask is, we can actually go into our newly created shape and levels node, and we're just going to create a connector that connects that piece. So now once we connect into the mask, the inner area is going to be that nice darker rubber color. Just gonna move stuff into place, keeping everything organized. You'll notice that it's getting almost like this weird effect because just the harshness of the mask. So I actually bring in the mask that has the initial bevel before the levels, and it gives us a better transition from the darker color to the lighter gunmetal. And I'm just gonna move a bit of the albedo over a little bit because I'm going to introduce a new color node here. I like the color of the rubber, but I want to make that tiling pattern just pop a little bit more. So I'm just going to duplicate that setup right here, and I'm actually going to grab the mask. Well, first I'm going to lighten up the color just a tad, and again it's just going to fill because there's no mask. And I'm going to go in and grab the tiling pattern, just the output, and I'm gonna use that as a mask for the for that color. But first, if I had just gotten that connector by itself, it's gonna fill the entire material. So I make sure to use a multiply onto that newly indented area, and now that pattern and color is only going to be affected on that new surface. So now we have a nice kind of lighter color on the raised up little tiling pattern that's on the rubber. I'm going through the roughness and making sure everything is still reading accordingly. We deleted a bunch of different nodes, so just want to make sure everything is reading okay. And I noticed that we had plugged in the new mask for the rubber on the color, but we hadn't actually plugged it into the roughness and the metallic. So I went ahead and just moved those connectors into the correct spots. So for the sticker decals, you can leave it as is, but I just wanted to introduce a new pattern and I kind of want to make a new sticker. You can totally leave them, these triangles, and just move them into place. But I want to make almost like a caution shape, kind of like that crisscross pattern that you see a lot of the times. So what I'm doing here is I just brought in a tile generator and I'm bringing down the Y value a little bit. So we have like a couple different rectangles here. And I brought in a safe transform. And what the safe transform does is that you can freely rotate while still keeping the tiling pattern, which is really nice. And then here I'm bringing in a shape and I'm just doing a subtract. That way it's only on that kind of rectangular shape. I bring in a transform because here I'm going to move it into position on where exactly I want it. So you notice down there it starts creeping up a little bit, but because of the rubber it's not appearing all the way. I make sure to turn the tiling off, that way I can freely move it wherever I want. I'm just gonna place it in an area I think is looking okay. This is more so to just fiddle with it right now. Once I have it in a side I like, I'm going to use the mirror grayscale node. That way it flips it on the other side as well. So now all I have to do is actually just move it on the transform and it's going to affect on both sides. And there we go. I use the mirror grayscale a lot just because if I have two somethings that are mirrored on each side, it's nice being able to just move one single transform and have it affect both of them. Here I'm just going back into the shape nodes and just scaling up just a little bit, just getting it to a point where I like it. And again, the decal color choice is up to you guys. You can leave it the yellow that we had previously, or for this case, I'm just going to go with like a lighter gray, almost kind of closer to a white. So next up, I started to look at the dirt node, and I'm starting to see how it's affecting this material in particular. I'm not seeing too much dirt on this one, so I kind of want to bump it up just a little bit so it kind of shows up more on this material than it did on the last one. So I'm just going to go in here and type in these new values. I basically just want to bump up the level and the grunge amount. Once we bring up the grunge amount, it's actually going to be pretty intense. So keep that in mind when messing with this. But you'll notice that the dirt is being shown a little bit more than it was previously. It's especially showing up on the rubber even more so. Going through the normal maps, making sure everything is okay. Again, I'm just constantly rotating the 3D viewport to make sure everything is looking the way it's supposed to. So there's one extra little thing I'd like to add to this guy, and I want to add some surface variation onto the actual rubber itself. So what I did there was I just duplicated the scratch node that we had to originally create the scratches on the metal surface. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a normal out of it and just apply it to the rubber area. So here I'm going back into the scratches and I'm messing with the values just a little bit just to get it to something that I like a little bit more. So that's taking the spline number down, messing with the distortion, messing with the random and the frequency as well. I'm bringing down the spline width down as well, so they're super thin, and also the randomness as well. So you'll notice on the node that it's almost like, unless you zoom in super close, you won't see the kind of effect that it's getting. And then I plug it into the normal node. I leave it on DirectX because I want the I want them to almost like be popping out from the rubber a little bit. But before I plug it into the normal, I make sure to add a blur high quality grayscale. From there, I'm just gonna bring in a normal combine, and I'm going to find the mask that we used earlier to set the color of the rubber, and I'm just going to use that. That way it can only be applied to that area of the rubber. I bring down the opacity so it's not as intense, and I'm constantly again looking at the 3D viewport, and I zoom in on the 2D viewport to make sure it's getting the desired effect. You can kind of see the scratches coming in a little bit on the 2D side. It's going to be a nice effect when you have the light hitting it at certain angles. So here I actually go into the material and turn on my tessellation to get a better representation of how the material is reading. I'll go back into the area where the pattern is being blended on, and I bump up the opacity so that pattern can just be pushed out a little bit more. Now that I had turned on the tessellation, I noticed that it wasn't being kind of extruded as much as I'd like it to. So I bumped that opacity up a little bit, and then I also add a blur grayscale to just give it so it's not as sharp on the edges. Just moving stuff into place, making sure everything is still as intended. If you bring up the opacity too high on this normal combine, you'll start losing the little tiling pattern, so make sure not to go too crazy on this. Here, I started experimenting with a normal, I believe it was a normal combine, but because this doesn't have an input for a mask, it's actually going to apply it to the whole material rather than say the normal blend where you can actually plug in a mask. So I made sure to leave it just on the normal blend. That way it gives me a little bit more control on where I want this effect to be showing up. So you can see here with the normal blend it was being applied everywhere, or sorry, with the combine it was being applied everywhere, and then with the normal blend we have the ability to add the mask. To make it show up a little bit stronger, I just go back into the normal that has the actual scratch combine, or the scratch plugged in, and I bump up the intensity of that normal. So now we can clearly see it on the 3D viewport. I go back into the roughness valleys and see how these guys are reading. I ended up taking the roughness value of the gunmetal and bringing it down just slightly. That way we get more metallic feel on it. It was feeling a little dull, so I just wanted to give it some nice more reflection when you shine the light on it. Here again, I'm just changing the base shape and seeing how this material is reading. And that pretty much sums this one up. You got a nice second variation to your floor that we did in the original tutorial. I take down the dirt a little bit so you guys can play with the intensity of this guy as well. So one other thing that we can do with this guy is, now that we have this variation, we're actually going to make a third one, and we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to take floor 02 and we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to name it floor 02 underscore glass. So we're going to make almost like a glass looking variation. So instead of the rubber panel, it's going to be a glass panel. And I kind of just want to show you guys the versatility of, it's nice to have one material that can be made into several different materials just by changing a few of the nodes and roughness types. So what you see me doing here is, I like the indent where that rubber is, but I'm not keeping that pattern. So I make sure to turn that off in the height. And I also turn off the scratches on the rubber as well in the normal map. I still like the color that's happening on that tiling pattern, but I don't want it to be those little like capsule looking shapes, so I keep that there. But then I go into the rubber and I start bringing up the roughness towards a black. That way we get almost like this glass like reflection. Some cool looking sci-fi glass. Cool thing about here is we can change it to whatever color we want. Same thing with those, that pattern that we have, we can change it to a white or anything. Again, you can keep it this pattern, but I'm actually going to change it. So here I'm just messing with the colors, seeing what feels right or looks cool. I end up going with like almost like a dark blue. And here I'm just following where that tiling pattern is coming from, but I'm gonna make a brand new shape that we can plug into that guy. So I'm just gonna start out with a polygon shape, and I'm just gonna make it three-sided so we get that nice triangle. Make sure the rotation is set to 90 degrees, that way it's going straight up and down. And I'm just gonna plug it into a transform to squash it down on the left and right side. Again, because tiling is on the main shape, it's gonna tile, so I make sure to go back into the polygon, or sorry, into the transform, and make sure to turn off no tiling. That way we only get a singular shape here. Here, I duplicated the polygon, but I realized that I needed a shape node, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that guy and just bring in a regular shape node. Bringing and create this into a disk. We're going to use this shape to basically warp the triangle that we currently have. So with that circular shape, I'm just adding a blur, and then I'm going to move it and squash it down to where I need it to. Again, turning off no tiling. And here I'm going to add the directional warp that'll be plugged into the triangle. So what's happening is that the new sphere we created is actually affecting the triangle. So I want to make it almost curved on the sides and get it to like almost like a peak at the top, but like curved at the bottom. So once I have one side looking how I like, I'm just going to use the mirror grayscale again. That way it mirrors both sides. Make sure to turn on the invert, and then we start getting the shape I want. And now from here, we can go back into the transform of where that circular shape is and just move it into place and try to create a shape that I'm looking for. Once I have a shape I'm liking, I'm going to bring in a splatter circular. That way we can set this guy to use our pattern input, so that newly created shape. And from here we can just start messing with the settings on this guy and creating like a cool looking sci-fi shape that we can tile around this whole glass. So here I'm just messing with the different parameters on here, finding something I like, bumping up the size and then bringing down the scale. You'll see we'll get like almost like a star effect here, and that's exactly what I was looking for. So once we have that shape, I just want to tile it. I'm going to bring in a tile generator and make sure we have it on pattern input. That way it tiles the newly created shape, bumping up the X and Y amount and just scaling down this guy. So now we can use this as a mask instead of that old rubber pattern that we had previously. And because we have set the color already, it's actually going to apply to the whole thing. So that's a cool looking idea if you guys want to leave it like that, but I still want it only to apply to the newly indented area. So I'm going to do the same thing I did here. I'm just going to blend multiply on that newly created pattern that we have. Again, I'm still going in with the dots and making sure our graph is organized. So now that pattern is being placed exactly where I want it to. And there we go. Again, you guys can create any sort of pattern you'd like, place it on there. Doesn't have to be this one in particular. I'm going ahead and messing with the roughness values on the glass. We can make it super reflective, or you guys don't have to make it as reflective. It can be matte if you guys want it. Again, I'm messing with the different base meshes just to see how the lighting's reacting to it. What's cool here is as I'm bringing up the dirt node, it's the way it's being affected on the glass is giving us a really cool effect. And that pretty much covers this one. So we have a second variation from, or almost a third variation from our first material. So we have a nice new rubber one and a glass one as well. I'm just gonna go ahead and open up Marmoset really quick to show you guys the setup that I have in here. So here I've gone ahead and created just a few different variations. So I have the glass one, the rubber one, and then I went in and added those kind of caution lines onto the actual rubber piece. So we get even, what is that, like a fourth variation now? And here, this is the same scene from the first tutorial. So we have both materials side by side. so you can see how they're cohesive and they just react next to each other. I've been getting a lot of questions on how I added the grading in Marmoset. So I'm just gonna go show you guys that really quick. I basically have two planes sitting on top of one another. So here I'm just gonna duplicate this plane, and I have the grading material here as well. So I'm just gonna apply it, and you can see already there, that's a fifth material we can pretty much have there. So in having the grading everywhere, we have this really cool new piece now. So that about sums up this lesson. I hope you guys learned something. I really want to show off the versatility of how we can make different variations from the same material. I think it's a super powerful thing to know, because we can quickly make different variations of the same material, but almost like one-offs, and have just start creating a really big texture library for a scene that you could be creating or something like that. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.